The Mexican-American War, also known as the Mexican War, the U.S. Mexican War of the invasion of Mexico, was an armed conflict between the United States of America and the United Mexican States from 1846 to 1848. It followed in the wake of the 1845 U.S. annexation of Texas, which Mexico considered part of its territory, despite the 1836 Texas Revolution. After its independence in 1821 on brief experiment with monarchy, Mexico became a republic in 1824, characterized by considerable instability, so that when war broke out in 1846, Mexico was ill-prepared for this conflict. The war with the United States followed in the wake of decades of Indian raids in the sparsely settled north of Mexico, which prompted the Mexican government to sponsor American migration to the Mexican province of Texas to act as a buffer. Americans and some Mexicans revolted against the Mexican government in the 1836 Texas Revolution, creating a republic not recognized by Mexico, which still claimed it as its national territory. The 1845 expansion of U.S. territory with its annexation of Texas escalated the dispute between the United States and Mexico to open war. In 1844, James K. Polk, the newly elected president, made a proposition to the Mexican government to purchase the disputed lands between the Nueces River and the Rio Grande. When that offer was rejected, troops from the United States, commanded by Major General Zachary Taylor, were moved into the disputed territory of Coahuila. These troops were then attacked by Mexican troops, killing 12 American troops and taking 52 prisoners. These same Mexican troops later laid siege to a U.S. fort along the Rio Grande. This would lead to the conflict that resulted in the loss of much of Mexico's northern territory. U.S. forces quickly occupied Santa Fe de Nuevo Mexico and Alta California territory, then invaded parts of northeastern Mexico and northwest Mexico. Meanwhile, the Pacific Squadron conducted a blockade and took control of several garrisons on the Pacific coast farther south in Baja California territory. Another American army, under the command of Major General Winfield Scott, captured the capital Mexico City, marching from the port of Veracruz, virtually unopposed. The 1848 Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo ended and specified the major consequence of the war: the Mexican cession of the territories of Alta California and Santa Fe de Nuevo Mexico to the United States. The U.S. agreed to pay $15 million to pay the physical damage of war. In addition, the United States assumed $3.25 million of debt owed by the Mexican government to U.S. citizens. Mexico recognized the loss of Texas and thereafter cited the Rio Grande as its national border with the United States. American territorial expansion to the Pacific coast had been the goal of U.S. President James K. Polk, the leader of the Democratic Party. The war was highly controversial in the United States, with the Whig Party, anti-imperialists and anti-slavery elements strongly opposed. Critics in the United States pointed to heavy casualties of the U.S. forces and high monetary cost of the conflict. The war intensified the slavery issue in the United States, leading to bitter debates that culminated in the bloody American Civil War. In Mexico, the war came in the middle of political turmoil, which increased into chaos during the conflict. The military defeat and loss of territory was a disastrous blow, causing Mexico to enter a period of self-examination, as its leaders sought to identify and address the reasons that had led to such a debacle. Quote, "In the immediate aftermath of the war, some prominent Mexicans wrote that the war that resulted in the state of degradation and ruin in Mexico, and saw for the true origin of the war, it is sufficient to say that the insatiable ambition of the United States, favored by our weakness, caused it. The shift in the Mexico U. border left many Mexican citizens separated from the national government. For the indigenous peoples who had never accepted Mexican rule, the change in border meant conflicts with a new outside power. Roots of the conflict in northern Mexico. The northern area of Mexico was sparsely settled and not well controlled politically by the government based in Mexico City. After independence from Spain in 1821, Mexico contended with internal struggles that sometimes verged on civil war. In the sparsely settled interior of northern Mexico, the end of Spanish colonial rule was marked by the end of financing for presidios and for subsidies to indigenous groups to maintain the peace. There were conflicts between indigenous peoples in the northern region as well. The Comanche were particularly successful in expanding the territory in the Comanche-Mexico Wars and garnering resources. The Apache-Mexico Wars also made Mexico's north a violent place with no effective political control. The Indian raids left thousands of people dead and devastated northern Mexico. When American troops entered northern Mexico in 1846, they found a demoralized people. There was little resistance to the Americans from the civilian population. Hostile activity from indigenous people also made communications and trade between the interior of Mexico and provinces such as Alta California and New Mexico difficult. As a result, New Mexico was dependent on the overland Santa Fe Trail trade with the United States at the outbreak of the Mexican-American War. The military and diplomatic capabilities of Mexico declined after it attained independence and left the northern half of the country vulnerable to the Comanche, Apache, and Navajo Indians. The Indians, especially the Comanche, took advantage of Mexico's weakness to undertake large-scale raids hundreds of miles deep into the country to acquire livestock for their own use, and to supply an expanding market in Texas and the U.S. The Mexican government's policy of settlement of Americans in its province of Texas was aimed at expanding control into Comanche lands, the Comanche area. Instead of settlement occurring in the central and west of the province, Americans settled in East Texas, where there was rich farmland and which was contiguous to southern slave-holding U.S. states. As American settlers poured in, the Mexican government took steps to discourage further settlement, including the 1829 abolition of slavery. In 1836, Mexico was relatively united in refusing to recognize the independence of Texas. Mexico threatened war with the United States if it annexed Texas. Meanwhile, U.S. President Polk's assertion of manifest destiny was focusing United States' interest on westward expansion beyond its existing national borders. Designs on California. During the Spanish colonial era, the Californias, the Baja California Peninsula and Alta California, were sparsely settled. In the second half of the 18th century, Spain became concerned that this territory, which it claimed but it did not effectively settle, could be taken by foreign powers. It then embarked on new policies to secure its northern coastal region, which it had earlier implemented in the interior of Mexico's north. The creation of missions and presidios, funded by the Spanish crown. Missions would congregate Indian peoples, convert them to Catholicism, and teach them civilized ways. Presidios were military posts to secure territory and establish Spanish sovereignty, pacify Indian peoples, and help attract Spanish civilian settlers. Missions and presidios were established in coastal California, and civilian settlement increased there. The Spanish crown claimed the interior of California and the northern California coast, but they were not controlled by the Spanish crown. By the late 18th century, Alta California became the economic center, and the Spanish crown moved its administrative center from Loreto, in Baja California, to Monterrey in 1777. Civilian settlement followed in San José de Guadalupe, founded by Governor Felipe de Neve. The governor also promulgated the Regulations for the Governance of California, a set of laws and regulations that became California's first constitutional corpus. Quote, "Submissions and presidios became the core for settlements that later became major cities. When Mexico won its independence from Spain in 1821, California, as a part of Mexico, became Mexican territory, but it was still a marginal region far from the national capital of Mexico City. Before Mexican independence in 1821, 20 land grants had been issued in all of Alta California, many to a few friends and family of the Alta California governors. The 1824 Mexican General Colonization Law established rules for petitioning for land grants in California, and by 1828, the rules for establishing land grants were codified in the Mexican Reglamento. The acts sought to break the monopoly of the Catholic Franciscan missions and possibly entice increased Mexican settlement. Research shows that the majority of rancho grants were given to retired non-commissioned soldiers. The largest grants to Tawney, Sepulcral, Dominguez, Yorba, Avila, Galvani, and other founding California families were examples of this practice. Many foreign residents of California in the Mexican period also became rancho grantees. Some were Californios by marriage, such as Abel Stearns and Englishman William Hartnell. Others married Californios but never became Mexican citizens. Rancho ownership was possible for these men because, under Spanish and then Mexican law, married women could independently hold title to property. In the Santa Cruz area, 3 Californio daughters of the invalidor José Joaquín Castro married foreigners yet still received grants to Rancho Soquel, Rancho San Agustin and Rancho Refugio. A U.S. diplomatic mission in 1829, led by Anthony Butler, attempted to bribe the Mexican government to give the port of San Francisco to the United States, as well as to cease claiming territory near what was then the U.S.-Mexican border. The Mexican Secularization Act of 1833, under the administration of Liberal President Valentin Gómez Farías, turned much of the Spanish missions in California into large ranchos of California, owned by Mexican settlers, undermining the power of the Roman Catholic Church, at the aim of the liberals in Mexico. Secularization brought new civilian settlers into Alta California, but the area remained economically and politically marginal to Mexico, with an economy based on cattle ranching and no known sources of mining wealth. In 1842, the U.S. minister in Mexico, Waddy Thompson, Jr., suggested Mexico might be willing to cede Alta California to settle debts, saying, "As to Texas, I regard it as of very little value compared with California, the richest, the most beautiful, and the healthiest country in the world. With the acquisition of Upper California we should have the same ascendancy on the Pacific." France and England both have had their eyes upon it. U.S. President John Tyler's administration suggested a tripartite pact that would settle the Oregon boundary dispute and provide for the cession of the port of San Francisco from Mexico. Lord Aberdeen declined to participate but said Britain had no objection to U.S. territorial acquisition there. The British minister in Mexico, Richard Pakenham, wrote in 1841 to Lord Palmerston urging to establish an English population in the magnificent territory of Upper California, saying that no part of the world offering greater natural advantages for the establishment of an English colony, by all means desirable, that California, once ceasing to belong to Mexico, should not fall fall into the hands of any power but England. Daring and adventurous speculators in the United States have already turned the thoughts in this direction, but by the time the letter reached London, Sir Robert Peel's Tory government with a Little England policy had come to power and rejected the proposal as expensive and a potential source of conflict. A significant number of influential Californios were in favor of annexation, either by the United States or by the United Kingdom. Pio de Jesus Pico IV, the last governor of Alta California, was in favor of British annexation. Republic of Texas. In 1800, the colonial province of Texas was sparsely populated, with only about 7,000 non-Indian settlers. The Spanish crown developed a policy of colonization to more effectively control the territory. After independence, the Mexican government implemented the policy, granting Moses Austin, a banker from Missouri, a large tract of land in Texas. Austin died before he could bring his plan of recruiting American settlers for the land to fruition, but his son, Stephen F. Austin, brought over 300 American families into Texas. This started the steady trend of migration from the United States into the Texas frontier. Austin's colony was the most successful of several colonies authorized by the Mexican government. The Mexican government intended the new settlers to act as a buffer between the Tejano residents and the Comanches, but the non-Hispanic colonists tended to settle where there was decent farmland and trade connections with American Louisiana, which the United States had acquired in the Louisiana Purchase, rather than further west where they would have been an effective buffer against the Indians. In 1829, as a result of the large influx of American immigrants, the non-Hispanic outnumbered native Spanish speakers in the Texas Territory. President Vicente Guerrero, a hero of Mexican independence, moved to gain more control over Texas and its influx of southern non-Hispanic colonists and discourage further immigration by abolishing slavery in Mexico. The Mexican government also decided to reinstate the property tax and increase tariffs on shipped American goods. The settlers and many Mexican businessmen in the region rejected the demands, which led to Mexico closing Texas to additional immigration, which continued from the United States into Texas illegally. In 1834, General Antonio López de Santa Anna became the centralist dictator of Mexico, abandoning the federal system. He decided to quash the semi-independence of Texas, having succeeded in doing so in Coahuila. Finally, Stephen F. Austin called Texians to arms. They declared independence from Mexico in 1836, and after Santa Anna defeated the Texians at the Alamo, he was defeated by the Texian army commanded by General Sam Houston and captured at the Battle of San Jacinto and signed a treaty recognizing Texas independence. Texas consolidated its status as an independent republic and received official recognition from Britain, France, and the United States, which all advised Mexico not to try to reconquer the new nation. Most Texians wanted to join the United States of America, but annexation of Texas was contentious in the U.S. Congress, where Whigs were largely opposed. In 1845, Texas agreed to the offer of annexation by the U.S. Congress. Texas became the 28th state on December 29, 1845. Origins of the war. The border of Texas as an independent state was originally never settled. The Republic of Texas claimed land up to the Rio Grande based on the treaties of Velasco, but Mexico refused to accept these as valid, claiming that the Rio Grande in the treaty was the Nueces, and referred to the Rio Grande as the Rio Bravo. Reference to the Rio Grande boundary of Texas was omitted from the U.S. Congress's annexation resolution resolution to help secure passage after the annexation treaty failed in the Senate. President Polk claimed the Rio Grande boundary, and when Mexico sent forces over the Rio Grande, this provoked a dispute. In July 1845, Polk sent General Zachary Taylor to Texas, and by October 3,500 Americans were on the Nueces River, ready to take by force the disputed land. Polk wanted to protect the border and also coveted for the U.S. the continent clear to the Pacific Ocean. At the same time, Polk wrote to Thomas Larkin, the American consul in the Mexican territory of Alta California, disclaiming American ambitions in California, but offering to support independence from Mexico, a voluntary accession to the United States, and warning that the United States would oppose a British or French takeover, to end another war scare with the United Kingdom over the Oregon Country. Polk signed the Oregon Treaty dividing the territory, angering Northern Democrats who felt he was prioritizing Southern expansion over Northern expansion. In the winter of 1845–46, the federally commissioned explorer John C. Fremont and a group of armed men appeared in Alta California. After telling the Mexican governor and the American consul Larkin he was merely buying supplies on the way to Oregon, he instead went to the populated area of California and visited Santa Cruz and the Salinas Valley, explaining he had been looking for a seaside home for his mother. Mexican authorities became alarmed and ordered him to leave. Fremont responded by building a fort on Gavilan Peak and raising the American flag. Larkin sent word that Fremont's actions were counterproductive. Fremont left California in March but returned to California and assisted the Bear Flag Revolt in Sonoma, where many American immigrants stated that they were playing the Texas game and declared California's independence from Mexico. On November 10, 1845, Polk sent John Slidell, a secret representative, to Mexico City with an offer to the Mexican government of $25 million for the Rio Grande border in Texas and Mexico's provinces of Alta California and Santa Fe de Nuevo Mexico. U.S. expansionists wanted California to thwart British ambitions in the area and to gain a port on the Pacific Ocean. Polk authorized Slidell to forgive the $3 million owed to U.S. citizens for damages caused by the Mexican War of Independence and pay another $25 to $30 million in exchange for the two territories. Mexico was not inclined nor able to negotiate. In 1846 alone, the presidency changed hands 4 times, the War Ministry 6 times, and the Finance Ministry 16 times. Mexican public opinion and all political factions agreed that selling the territories to the United States would tarnish the national honor. Mexicans who opposed direct conflict with the United States, including President José Joaquín de Herrera, were viewed as traitors. Military opponents of de Herrera, supported by populist newspapers, considered Slidell's presence in Mexico City an insult. When de Herrera considered receiving Slidell to settle the problem of Texas annexation peacefully, he was accused of treason and deposed. After a more nationalistic government under General Mariano Paredes Guerrilla came to power, it publicly reaffirmed Mexico's claim to Texas. Slidell, convinced that Mexico should be chastised, returned to the U.S.